Welcome back to the Drive Home Reviews podcast, where I review the movies that I have just seen as I'm driving home from the theater. And this is another one that I really wish I could have gotten to during Pride Month. It was released during Pride Month, but sadly it is not that surprising that neither one of the theaters that I have immediate access to carried it. One of the drawbacks of living in a largely conservative area. And I think that's a damn shame for a number of reasons, but not the least of which being this is a really, really good little movie. And I don't call it a little movie to be dismissive of it, but in a summer landscape that is so often dominated by, big explosions and CGI monsters and reboots of old movies and all this and that, this is a quiet, personal film. I would almost go so far as to call it vaguely independent in its filmmaking and its topics and whatnot. But I think a lot better than a lot of the independent movies I've seen. And more to the point, from my perspective, which we'll talk about that here in just a second, I think this is an important movie that a lot of people should see, especially during Pride Month. So I apologize that I wasn't able to get it out by then, but I had to see it when it was available to me, and I am now glad that I did. I believe this is probably one of the best movies I've seen this year. And as is so often the case, it's the best movie I've seen this year that nobody's talking about. And if I do nothing else, I hope I encourage a couple other people to go and check this movie out, because I think it's a good movie and it's an important film. But primarily, it's just really well done. It's just a good film. So before I get into anything, I need to say this, because I do think this is important to make this distinction. This is, as the title will suggest, an LGBTQ love story made by an LGBTQ filmmaker depicting a specifically LGBTQ experience. I am a white heterosexual male, also almost in my 50s, so I'm an old white heterosexual male. And because of that, I can only give you my insights and my opinions on this movie based on my own field of experience. Now, I have had experience with LGBTQ youth. As I've mentioned, I am a theater teacher, and so I have had dealings with every color of the rainbow on the flag in one form or another. So I have some firsthand experience in working with these kids and understanding them, and but I would never claim to be able to fully understand their life experience. So to that end, I just want to say that this review, that is the perspective it is coming from, all right? So I can only give you my interpretation based on my own understanding of how well this actually depicts a situation like this and a relationship like this and the consequences of it, both positive and negative. If you want a more in-depth and maybe more informed opinion, go find, there are tons of them out there, find an LGBTQ critic or audience member and ask them, how well did this do? Do you think this was an honest portrayal? I can't answer that for you with 100% of accuracy, and I don't think anybody really can, because everybody's life experience is different. But there's always going to be a divide between what I perceive in a movie like this and what an audience member or a critic who is actually a member of that group and has had similar life experiences that they can connect with. So I know that's a lot of preamble and a lot of clarification, but I don't want to come off as one of these people who's like, oh, I worked with LGBTQ kids, and so I know everything about their life experience. I would never claim to make that statement. And so, yeah, so just please understand that that's where this review is coming from. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way, the qualifications are out of the way, let's actually talk about the movie. So what you have is, this is your basic coming-of-age story. You have Nicole, also known as Cole, also known as Coley, which gets a little confusing at times, people calling her, different people calling her different names. I feel like I'm reading a Chekhov play where every character has like 3 different names, and it depends on who they're talking to, which one they're being called. So that got a little confusing, but that's not a knock, just a statement. So she has just moved to this more rural area of Oregon, I believe, is where the movie takes place. It's 2006. It took me a little while to realize. I had to look up, like, what year was this supposed to be taking place in, because the technology they're using, the cell phone designs, it's weird that we can now pinpoint eras by what type of cell phone people are using. The fact that our 2 main characters communicate primarily through online chatting, So anyway, she has just moved there to live with her estranged father because of her mother's recent passing. Also, another thing I want to point out, and I'm going to be very careful here, I'm not trying to make a joke, because I get the feeling that this story is incredibly semi-autobiographical. I really get that feeling from it. So I don't mean to disrespect anybody or make light of anybody's losses, but have you ever noticed that in all these modern coming-of-age stories, like, somebody has lost a parent, it's usually the mother? So many of these coming-of-age kids, they have more dead mothers than Disney princesses these days.
Do you have daddy issues?
I don't even have a mom.
Neither do we.
Again, that is not a criticism of the movie. It's simply an observation of the genre. So, again, no disrespect intended. Anyway, so Coley is having a little bit of trouble fitting in. She's very distant. She's kind of a loner until she has kind of a chance meeting with a group of young people and is befriended by one of the local girls, played by Myra Mallory. And the 2 of them start out on a relationship. It begins as friends, but even from the very beginning, you get the feeling by the way Myra Mallory's character kind of looks at Coley, the way she smiles, kind of some of the terminology she uses, you get the feeling that maybe there's a little something more going on here. And the relationship blossoms, it blooms, and it eventually turns into a romance. And there are, of course, complications and everything. You get it, all right? That's just the basic outline of it. So, let's talk about the things that I like about this movie, because there are a lot of them. First of all, one of the things I really like about this movie, and the way it's presented, is it is presented as a coming-of-age story. It's not necessarily, at least from my perspective, presented as, you'll pardon me for being a little vulgar here, as the lesbian love story. It's not presented as that, as other more crass films might have tried to market it or try to present it. it is presented as a coming-of-age story. And, again, I stress that obviously I can't understand this specific relationship from that point of view, but what I can understand is what it was like to be young. You know, young people can never understand old people, but old people are guilty if they forget what it's like to be young. It's a true statement. And I believe that most of us can remember what it was like to grow up and hit that 15, 16, 17-year-old gap where the world is not necessarily making the sense that you want it to make, and you're trying to figure out who you are, and there are life changes that are outside of your control, be they the loss of a parent or a loved one, or just the idea that you're in the last couple years of school and suddenly you're going to be expected to be an adult. I think a lot of us can relate to that. And I think along with that, many of us can relate to what it's like to suddenly have the first real stirrings of emotion for somebody. I'm not talking about teenage lust. I'm not talking about, like, I can only speak for myself, but you know that, as a young man, your hormones are kind of going crazy and you don't know how to control them or where to direct them at. This is why Baywatch was so popular when I was a kid. But more what it's like to actually fall in love for the first time. What it means to actually have real, complicated feelings for someone, and all of the purity and all of the joy and all of the mess and the heartbreak and the happiness that comes out of that. I think most of us can relate to that in one way or another. And it's one of the things I really liked about this film, and one of the reasons I think more people should have seen it during Pride Month. I mentioned this in my Stop That Train review, but I tend to believe that if we can all concentrate more on what we have in common as opposed to what's different about us, I think the world would be a lot better. I think we'd all have a little bit more understanding of one another. And again, from a heterosexual male perspective, I may not be able to understand what it's like to suddenly find yourself attracted to a member of the same sex, but I can certainly understand the confusion and all the litany of emotions when you finally fall in love with someone for the first time, and when that love is reciprocated. That is the big thing. Teenagers can fall in and out of love with someone very quickly, but it's when that love is actually returned and there's a mutual love. That is something I can remember very clearly. And I think if we can see that, these kids, these people are just people, and their emotions are the same as yours. It's just that they're directed at a different gender. And should that really be such a dividing line? And yes, this is an LGBTQ plus story. It is at its core, unequivocally. But the way it's presented, at least from my standpoint, is that it's presented as it's life. It's life happening, and these kids trying to make the most sense of it. And I think that's brilliant. It's a brilliant way to go. And yes, the same-sex element of it is vital to the story, because obviously there are consequences to that. And I am sure, again, never experienced it myself, but I am positive that has got to be incredibly confusing and difficult for a young person to grapple with for the first time. I like that it's never brought right out from Coley's side. Coley played by Maya DaCosta. So Maya DaCosta's character, it's never said outright, but you kind of get from the way she's looking and the way she reacts that this is not her first time that she kind of knows her sexuality. I think she's, if not having come to terms with it, she accepts that it's part of her, at least from the visuals that I see. Meanwhile, Myra Mallory's character, this is the very first time she's ever experienced this. And the confusion and there's a really great scene where, after they've had, of course, their breakup, and we've had the all is lost moment.
The all is lost moment!
Where the two are talking again, and she says, I don't know what to make of this. I've never felt this way. I don't know if it's just you, or if it's, all girls. I don't know. And God, that's got to be so confusing. That's got to be so difficult. And what this movie does incredibly well from every side is it depicts that. It depicts the confusion and how hard it is for these kids. Really think back to when you were a kid, when you were a teenager, and trying to make sense of your feelings. Now imagine adding on top of that sandwich the added implication that, the fear that your family might reject you, that society will reject you, that you are admitting something that society as a whole, while yes, way more understanding and accepting than it once was, is still full of a lot of bigots who, quite frankly, want to kill people for this, for who they love. How terrifying is that? Slight digression here.
Now, I don't want to get off on a rant here.
When I was in graduate school, I worked with a guy, and he was gay. But his family didn't know. He wasn't so much in the closet, he was just more kind of on the down low, if that makes sense. And I remember having a conversation with him, and he said, he was scared to tell his family because he didn't know how they were going to react. I mean, this was in Tennessee. All right, so yeah, you can understand that. And I met his family, and his family were wonderful, adoring people who clearly loved him, were very proud of him. But there was a genuine fear from him that this family would reject him if they found out about this. So yeah, that's a real thing. Just as a sidebar, I will report that in the years since he has come out, his parents still, from what I've seen, love him. I see their social media posts. He's there with them. He's married now, and he and his husband, I've seen them in pictures with his family. So it looks like everything worked out great for him, and I'm very happy about that because he's a great guy, and his family were just really, really lovely people. But not everybody's that lucky. And some of these communities especially can be very, very judgmental, and harshly so. So, yeah, the film does a great job of showcasing that through Myra Mallory's character, and also showcasing that, yes, Myra Mallory's character she's not the main point of view character. Coley is. So we're seeing all of Myra Mallory's actions through Coley's eyes. And yes, to her, they seem hurtful and they seem intentional. The fallout from their hookups, how you go from kissing and loving and saying all these wonderful things to not acknowledging me and not treating me like a person or like you even know me, or not telling me certain things. Yeah, you can see how that would upset her. But you can also understand from Myra Mallory's point of view, there's a reason. She's fucking confused. She doesn't know how to handle this. And you're sympathetic to both of them. There's not a villain in this. Well, there kind of is in Myra Mallory's douchey boyfriend, so he's kind of a villain, but he's a minor villain who's more to the side. There's no actual antagonist in this outside of the pangs and perils of growing up. So I just think that they were able to layer all of these things on top of each other to make this a uniquely LGBTQ plus movie, but also pepper it with enough recognizable emotions and touchstones and elements from life that I think just about everybody can relate to it. And that's hard to do. That is not easy. So that's outstanding. Also outstanding, another thing I really liked about this movie are our two main characters, are our two leads. And these two girls, what an amazing acting job both of them did. First of all, they have outstanding chemistry together. Like, their moments together don't feel scripted. They don't feel like they're playing a part. They feel like they're genuinely enjoying each other. Like, you can see the relationship building and why they care about one another and why this connection is being forged. It's just a very easy chemistry that they have. And as with most things in theater or movies or anything like that, when it looks easy, it's sometimes not. So it's a big shout out to the two of them, just how excellent they are at their roles. And also, there is a lot going on here in terms of the acting. With one of my rules of acting in theater is that acting is reacting. Yes, not a major revelation. I'm sure most people would agree with that, but it is very true. And so much of their communication, especially of what they're feeling and the confusion and the excitement of it, is all communicated in their faces. There are a lot of scenes of these two just looking at each other and the way they're looking at each other. Myra Mallory especially, again, because her character is the one that's kind of going through the most internal conflict. And when she's looking at Nicole, you can see it in her eyes and her facial expressions. That look of, wow, I really like this person. Wow, this person's really pretty. Wow, you can see in her face when she wants to kiss her. You can see it, and it's subtle. And that is such good acting from both of them. They both do this. I also think Maya DaCosta, who plays Coley, she has a difficult job, because Coley could come off as just your typical whiny, emotionally blocked off teen if not done right. But they give her enough interaction with other characters and show enough of her kind of coming of age and growing up that you realize, okay, this is someone who had a lot of pain to work through, a lot of it, and she's doing it, and she's made some mistakes, but she's, you know, we've all been there. We've all been at a point in our lives, especially when we're young, of just not knowing what the right thing to do is, or even having a clue of what the right thing to do is. So you just try, okay, well, I'm not over this person, so I'll go over here. That'll make it better, and it doesn't. You're like, oh, you know, I'm mad at my dad, so I'll yell at him and shut him out, but that doesn't actually make it better, actually healing the wounds. We also find out that she's carrying not just the trauma of course, losing her mother, but they hint that her mother had, I think, some kind of mental health issues, probably bipolar disorder or depression or something to that effect, and ended up, I believe, taking her own life. And of course, Coley is not just suffering from the anger and all that of that instance, but also suffering from a certain amount of survivor's guilt. If I had come home sooner, if I had done this. And it's not until she finally kind of lets her dad in. Her dad, by the way, played by Zach Braff, who I did not recognize until like halfway through the movie, and he stood up and you got a good look at him and I'm like, holy shit, that's Zach Braff. And he does the whole cast does great. It's a really good cast. But he does a great job, and her kind of finally accepting him and saying, okay, all this anger I'm carrying around isn't really doing me any good, so let's start over. I think that's another great theme that the movie has, is that you can start over. Even if you make a lot of mistakes, you can always start again and learn from them. And yeah, very well done. Also really well done. And this is where we're kind of segueing into now talking about the directing, which I really want to touch on here. But specifically, I want to start out by talking about the intimacy of the film and the very, very personal and intimate moments of this film, because that is another thing that is done exceptionally well. Because it's very, very difficult for a film like this. There is a dual standard between same-sex relationships that are male and same-sex relationships that are female. And I think it's not a good thing. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it exists. But especially when it comes to girls liking girls, there is, if not more acceptability towards it, but there is a titillation factor to it. I hope an erotic factor to it in popular culture. And as such, when you have a story like this, which is dealing with very real emotions, and again, you want to show those young love emotions of that first feeling of what it's like to touch somebody, to smell them, to your lips touching theirs. It's an electric emotion, especially when you're young. You want to illustrate that, but you also have to be very careful not to cross over into the, let's call it the HBO zone.
We now return to True Blood. Hi, I'm a nude vampire.
Hi, I'm a nude werewolf.
And that's the show.
That idea that we're just showing this because it's erotic, or people in the audience are going to be going, ooh, that you want to portray these intimate moments honestly. They have to be there, but you don't want it to cross over into being exploitive. And I think everybody involved does a great job. Again, the actors do an amazing job. They must have felt very comfortable on set, first of all, with each other and with the people they're working with, because that's a huge factor. Actor safety and emotional safety is really important in situations like this. And you can tell that they felt very safe and very comfortable in their surroundings with the people they were working with. Even so, that's a lot you're asking them to do in terms of kissing, touching, caressing, physical closeness. And so kudos to those actors for doing that, for going there and being on the right balance, And this is where I have to start praising the director, because holy shit. So this movie is directed by Hayley Kiyoko. By the way, if I have mispronounced anybody's names in this, I sincerely apologize. I'm very bad at that. So if I've mispronounced your names, I deeply apologize. Hayley Kiyoko wrote the book that this is based on. She wrote the bestseller that this based on. She also co-wrote the screenplay, and she also wrote and performed the song for him. She's a pop singer. Her only directing credits up till this were her own music videos. This is the very first film that she's directed. So, Hayley, if I may call you Hayley, can I please ask, can you please save some talent for the rest of us? Because it seems like you got it all, kid. Like, damn, what a talented person. Holy shit. And this is her first fucking movie, and it's It's really fucking well directed. It's cleverly directed. And in a way, you can kind of tell this is her first movie, and I mean that in the very best of ways, in that there's a rawness to it. It's not polished. It's not, you know, the harder edges aren't rounded off, you know, as you would get in, okay, just as a point of comparison, look at Regretting You, the movie from last year with McKenna Grace. That's a very spit and polished, studio presented coming of age story. I liked it. I thought it was fun. I thought it was a good melodrama. But it's very clearly a studio production with polishing all over it. And this one has a much more personal feel to the whole thing, which is what it needs. And it's not that there's anything bad about the filmmaking. It's just, you can tell it's a lot of it is from someone who this is the first time they're doing it. And if this is the first thing they've ever done, holy shit, I can't wait to see what they do going forward. Because I want to see her direct a lot more movies, but at the same time, I don't want her to lose that raw edge that this film has. I really don't. And again, everything I've mentioned as a positive in here, you can trace that directly back to her. This is her story. This is as pure a page-to-screen adaptation as you could possibly hope for. I mean, again, point of comparison, look at the book of Jurassic Park versus the movie of Jurassic Park. They are very, very different. So here you can honestly say you are getting the creative voices' personal view of this. This is their take on their own material. And everything from the intimacy to the balance to it never crossing over into melodrama, which it easily could have. Again, one of the reasons I liked Regretting You is because it was very melodramatic and had that, you know, Dawson's Creek kind of feel to it.
All new Dawson's Creek.
But this one could have very easily segued into that, but it didn't. It never crossed over, and that is all down to the director, the creative force behind it. So, bravo! I have to give complete props. However, there are two things, and it should say something that I can only think of two things about this movie that not so much even that I didn't like, but that I don't think worked as well, or that I wanted to see, again, from my personal perspective, wanted to see more of a commentary made on it. First of all, again, only two things. That's pretty good for me. So the first one is just a personal thing. So I understand if maybe not everybody gets this. But one of the things that kind of was uncomfortable to me is the extreme amount of teenage drinking that is going on in this movie. Now, before you start commenting, I'm not a prude. I know that teenage drinking happens, okay? And drinking in teen movies has always been a thing. The reason I call this movie out on it is that Myra Mallory's character, and I'm sorry, I totally blanked her name. I'll remember it as soon as I'm done with the video. It's nothing complex, but yet I can't quite pick it out. Anyway, her character spends a lot of time drinking and seems to only start making these connections with Coley when she's drinking. Now, I understand that there's probably, you know, the subtext there is that the drinking lowers the inhibition. She's not as guarded. Okay, I understand that. But at the same time, she's never really called out on this. When she and Coley kind of have their come to Jesus meeting, you know, they finally have their big fight, I was kind of hoping that, you know, Nicole would kind of tell her, hey, you know, I'm not I'm not just your drunk hookup. You can't treat me like this, and just do a whole, well, I did it because I was drunk. These are my emotions, and if you can't treat me the same way sober as you do drinking, then, again, I know that's kind of a personal thing. I am very, very, very against teenage drinking. I've known too many people who have died. So, yeah, I understand that's a me thing. I also think that in terms of directorially, there are a lot of times when we're told she's drunk, but we've never actually seen her do that much drinking. In one of their first interactions where they're in her room, she runs out to go throw up. And I was thinking, holy shit, is she pregnant? Is she dying? No, they're saying it's because she was drinking, but I don't think we ever actually saw her drinking. It's a fine line between the show and tell kind of thing. But that's a personal preference. It doesn't ruin my enjoyment of the movie, just something I wish they maybe would have brought up. What I will call out and say is the one thing I can say I did not like about the direction of this movie. All right. So, I'm watching the film. It's coming to the end. Spoiler alerts.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
Maybe say spoiler before you give away the end of a movie, okay?
The film ends with our two heroines sitting by a pool, and they're having a discussion, and Myra Mallory kind of leans over and puts her head on Coley's shoulder, and that's where the screen goes black and the credits roll. And I was like, okay, a little ambiguous, but I kind of liked that. I liked that it showed that they were reconciling, and maybe now Myra Mallory's character was maybe ready to confront this and was going to, and all the, okay, maybe it didn't spell anything out, but you don't need everything to spell it out to you. And the credits start to roll, and I'm like, okay, I'm not quite thrilled with that ending, but I understand what they were going for. Okay, fine. That night, I'm going through and looking for the photos and the pictures that I use when I do the YouTube version of this, and I find Hayley Kiyoko's Instagram that's got a lot of behind-the-scene photos, and I'm like, awesome. And I notice she says, make sure you watch all the way to the end. And I'm like, does this movie have a fucking end credits scene? And I looked it up, and yeah, the movie has a fucking end credits scene. And so I went back, I went and I watched the end credits scene where we get our actual closure to the movie. And it's a great ending. I'm very happy with the ending. No comments or criticisms about where it's its place in the story. I have criticisms about where it's placed in the fucking movie. We live in a post-Marvel Cinematic Universe world where now it is expected that big blockbusters are going to have end credit scenes, and sometimes those end credit scenes are setups for sequels or little Easter eggs or just a little joke, like the Avengers all eating shawarma at the end of the first Avengers. So, little things like that, little bonuses for the audience. Okay, fine. But their use in mainstream, I don't want to say normal movies, but let's call them dramatic films. Their use in those, because this end scene, this is not a little joke, it's not a little Easter egg, I don't believe it's planting the seeds for a sequel. It's the actual ending of the movie. Why the fuck would you put that after the credits? I do not agree with that directorial choice. I'm sure there's a reason, because I get the feeling that, Hayley Kiyoko is a very thoughtful storyteller, and I don't think she does anything in her movies without there being a reason. And I can understand that. Shows I've directed, I've done things that made sense to me that I've had people criticize me for and say, well, that looked dumb. It's like, yeah, but I liked it. It made sense to me, and that's why I did it. So maybe that's what this is, or maybe there's a deeper reason for why you chose to put this after the credits that I don't get. But I feel like when you do that in a, let's call it a dramatic piece like this, you run the risk of most of your audience not seeing the ending of the movie. And that's kind of a shit move, in my opinion. So I do not understand that choice. I'm sure there's a reason, I just don't understand it, and I don't think it was the right one, personally. But when you consider that those are the only two major gripes I have with this film, that's pretty damn good. That is pretty, that's a good track record. All in all, I think this is a really good movie, really heartfelt, really genuine, well directed, well written, well acted. And I think more eyes need to be on it. I think it's an important film that people need to see. I think, yeah. So I think that's everything I need to cover. So let's wrap this up. So final grade for Girls Like Girls, I'm giving it an A+. I'm giving it an A+. I really liked this movie. And I think that its story and the way it's told are, they illustrate experience and intelligence and storytelling prowess far beyond the experience level of the people doing it. Kind of like, I feel the same way about this one as I did when I saw Good Will Hunting for the first time. And this was a movie written by these two kids. It was their movie. It was their story, and you could see the passion and the depth that they put into it. So I get that same feeling when I watch this one. So I strongly encourage you to go check this one out. I really, really think it's worth the time, and it needs to be in the discussion more. So that's it. So that is our talk on this one. I thank you for coming along with me. I thank you for listening to me. And as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.